I planned everything for our anniversary trip. 2 weeks later, my husband announced he was going on a cruise with his daughter and his ex-wife on that exact day. No explanation, no apology. Then he texted me, "My daughter needs both her parents there." I smiled and replied. The moment he read my message, his face went pale. "Wait, what?" My name is Emily Carter, and for most of my marriage, I was the woman who understood. At least that's what everyone called it. Understanding, patient, supportive, flexible. Those were the words people used whenever I sacrificed something important so someone else could have what they wanted. After a while, I started noticing that nobody ever asked whether I wanted to be understanding. They simply expected it. I was 42 years old, living outside Columbus, Ohio, and working as director of operations for a regional logistics company. My days were packed with schedules, budgets, deadlines, and people who depended on me to solve problems before they became disasters. Oddly enough, my marriage wasn't much different. Ryan Carter, my husband, owned a construction company he had started 12 years earlier. We had been married for 8 years, together for almost 10. When we met, he was charming, hard-working, and devoted to his daughter, Ava. I admired that. A man who loved his child wasn't a red flag, and it was a green one. At the time, Ava was 8 years old and still struggling with her parents' divorce. Ryan's ex-wife, Sarah, remained heavily involved in their lives, which made sense. They shared custody, attended school events together, and generally maintained a civil relationship. I respected that too. In fact, I worked hard to make sure Ava never felt caught between households. I attended soccer games. I drove her to dance practice. I helped with science projects. I spent countless evenings listening to teenage worries and heartbreaks. I never tried to replace her mother. I simply tried to be another adult who loved her. For years, I genuinely believed we had built something healthy. Then little things started adding up. The pattern was almost invisible at first. Whenever Sarah needed something, Ryan rearranged his entire life. Whenever I needed something, I was asked to compromise. The first time I noticed it was our second wedding anniversary. We had reservations at a restaurant downtown. An hour before dinner, Ryan canceled because Sarah's car had broken down. "She has Ava with her," he explained. I understood. The second time we had planned a weekend getaway, Sarah got sick. Ryan volunteered to take Ava for the weekend. I understood. The third time, my mother flew in from Arizona for a visit. Sarah needed help moving furniture. Ryan disappeared for half a day. Again, I understood. By year 6 of our marriage, understanding had become my full-time occupation. Whenever I expressed disappointment, Ryan would sigh and say the same thing. You're an adult. Ava is a kid. Or Sarah and I are just co-parenting. Or, can't you be a little more understanding? The frustrating part was that none of those statements were technically wrong. That was what made them so effective. He never sounded selfish. He sounded responsible, reasonable, noble even, which meant I always ended up feeling guilty for being hurt. That spring marked 10 years since the day Ryan and I first met. I wanted to celebrate. Not because I was obsessed with anniversaries, but because life had become so busy that we rarely spent meaningful time together anymore. So, I planned something special. A week in Napa Valley, wine tours, a luxury resort, a hot air balloon ride at sunrise, dinner reservations at restaurants that had waiting lists months long. Every detail was arranged, every confirmation email neatly inside a folder on my laptop. I spent nearly 6 months organizing the trip. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel excited. One Saturday afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen island comparing winery options when Ryan walked in. He looked distracted. Not guilty, not nervous, just distracted. That should have been my first warning. "Hey," he said casually. "Hey." He grabbed a bottle of water from the refrigerator. "We need to talk about the anniversary week." I smiled. "Okay." He unscrewed the cap. "I'm going on a cruise." For a second, I thought I had misheard him. "A cruise?" "Yeah." I waited. Surely there was more. There wasn't. "During our anniversary trip?" "Yeah." I stared at him. Ryan shrugged. "Ava's school year ends that week." "What does that have to do with a cruise?" He took a sip of water. "Sarah booked one." I blinked. "Sarah booked a cruise?" "Right. And you're going?" "Yeah." I felt like I had walked into the middle of a conversation that had already happened somewhere else. Ryan, our anniversary trip is that week. I know. That answer hit harder than I expected. Not because he forgot. Because he remembered. He knew. And he chose the cruise anyway. I set my laptop down. What exactly is happening? He sighed, already sounding irritated. Ava wants both her parents there. I laughed once, not because it was funny. Because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She's 16. So? So she's not 6. Ryan folded his arms. Emily, this isn't a competition. I looked at him. No, it isn't. But somehow, it always felt like one. The conversation went nowhere. Every concern I raised was met with another explanation, another justification, another reason why his decision made sense, and my feelings were inconvenient. By the time he walked away, I felt exhausted. Not angry, just tired. Deeply tired. That night I sat alone on the back patio while the Ohio sunset disappeared behind the trees. The silence felt heavier than usual, and for the first time in years, I asked myself a question I had spent a long time avoiding. What if this wasn't about the cruise? What if this was about every single time I had been asked to understand? 2 days later, while I was at work reviewing quarterly reports, my phone buzzed. Ryan. I opened the message. My daughter needs both her parents there. That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement, no appreciation, just another reminder that I was expected to accept my place. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Then I smiled. Because something inside me had finally become clear. A month earlier, a recruiter from Denver had called. A major logistics corporation wanted me for a senior executive position. The opportunity was extraordinary. I had declined it because moving would complicate my marriage. Now, as I looked at Ryan's message, I realized something. I was the only person in this relationship making sacrifices. Slowly, I typed my response. You're right. Family should come first. I made a decision too. I hit send. 30 seconds later, my phone started ringing. Ryan, again and again. Then another text appeared. Wait, what? I looked at the screen. For the first time in years, I didn't answer. The first time Ryan called after my text, I ignored it. The second time, I ignored it too. By the 5th call, I switched my phone face down on my desk and returned to the spreadsheet open on my monitor. Across the conference room, 2 members of my operations team were discussing shipping forecasts for the 3rd quarter. Normally, I would have been fully engaged in the conversation, but my mind kept drifting back to the message I had sent, not because I regretted it, because I knew exactly what it meant. For years, I had been making choices based on what was best for my marriage. Ryan had been making choices based on what was best for Ryan. The difference was finally impossible to ignore. An hour later, my office phone rang. Emily Carter. Emily. Ryan. His voice was tight. What decision? I leaned back in my chair. The text. Oh. Silence. Emily. I closed my eyes briefly. The fact that he sounded alarmed now was almost funny. Not when I had spent 6 months planning a trip. Not when he canceled our anniversary. Not when he chose a cruise with his ex-wife. Now. Only now? What did you decide? He asked. I accepted the Denver position. Silence. Complete silence. For nearly 5 seconds then. What? I accepted the job. You turned that down. I changed my mind. You're moving? I'll be relocating in 3 months. More silence. I could practically hear him trying to process it. What about us? The question landed strangely. Not because it was unreasonable. Because it arrived years too late. What about us? I repeated, Emily. What about us when you canceled our anniversary? That's different. I almost laughed. Of course it was. Everything was always different when it affected him. We'll talk tonight, I said. Then I ended the call. For the rest of the afternoon, I focused on work. Unlike my marriage, work rewarded effort. Problems had solutions. Deadlines could be met. People generally meant what they said. At 6 Hills, I drove home. Ryan was waiting in the kitchen. He looked unsettled. Good. For years I had been unsettled. He could survive a few hours. You accepted the job? He asked immediately. I set my purse down. Without talking to me? The irony nearly knocked me over. I stared at him. Without talking to you? His expression shifted. Not enough, but slightly. That's not fair. No, Emily. Did you talk to me before agreeing to the cruise? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. This is different. There it was. The phrase that had become the soundtrack of our marriage. Different. Everything was different. Every sacrifice I made was expected. Every sacrifice he made was extraordinary. I'm not saying the cruise was ideal, he said carefully, but Ava wanted us there, and I wanted my husband on our anniversary trip. Emily. I shook my head. No, don't. For once I wasn't interested in another explanation. The conversation ended with neither of us satisfied. Over the next several days, Ryan became unusually attentive. Flowers appeared. Dinner invitations followed. He started asking about my day. He snorts volunteered to do chores. The sudden effort might have been flattering if it hadn't arrived 8 years late. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Something Ryan hadn't fully considered. My role in his business. Officially, I wasn't employed by Carter Construction. Unofficially, I was woven into nearly every part of it. When Ryan launched the company years earlier, he had almost no administrative experience. He knew construction, he knew job sites, he knew crews, paperwork, accounting, contracts, insurance requirements, vendor negotiations. That had been my territory. Over time, I had built systems that allowed the company to function efficiently. I reviewed contracts, managed scheduling software, maintained vendor relationships, handled regulatory compliance, created bidding templates. Ryan always joked that I was his secret weapon. What he never acknowledged was how much he depended on that weapon. The Monday after accepting the Denver position, I sat down with him in our dining room. A folder rested between us. "What's this?" he asked. "Documentation." "For what?" "My transition," Ryan frowned. "What transition?" I slid the folder across the table. Inside were past wagers, vendor contacts, training documents, process guides. Everything I had quietly maintained for years. His expression changed as he flipped through the pages. "This is a lot." "Yes, you did all this?" I looked at him. For a moment, I genuinely didn't know how to answer, because the shocking part wasn't the question. The shocking part was that he seemed surprised. "Who did you think was doing it?" I asked. Ryan looked down again. For the first time, I saw uncertainty, not guilt, not yet, just uncertainty. The next week brought more surprises. A supplier called asking for clarification on a contract renewal. Ryan didn't know the answer. A project manager needed access to compliance records. Ryan didn't know where they were. An accountant requested documentation. Ryan couldn't find it. None of this happened because I sabotaged him. I didn't. I left everything organized, everything documented, everything accessible. The problem was simple. Ryan had never paid attention. For years, he assumed things magically handled themselves. Now, he was discovering they never had. One Thursday evening, I walked into the kitchen and found him surrounded by paperwork. Stacks of it. Invoices, insurance forms, tax documents, bids, purchase orders. He looked exhausted. I poured myself a glass of water. "Long day?" Ryan rubbed his forehead. "You have no idea." Actually, I did. I'd been living that day for years. "What happened?" I asked. "A subcontractor issue." I nodded. "The Johnson project?" His head snapped up. "How did you know?" Because I had warned him about that subcontractor 6 months earlier, but I simply shrugged. Lucky guess. For the first time, Ryan didn't have an explanation. He didn't have a defense. He just looked tired, and maybe finally a little humbled. 2 days later, he left for the cruise. I drove him and Ava to the port in Cleveland. The atmosphere inside the SUV felt strangely formal. Ava chatted excitedly about excursions and activities. Ryan kept glancing at me, waiting for something. A fight, an argument, a dramatic scene. He got none of those things. When we arrived, Ava hugged me tightly. "I wish you were coming." "I know, sweetheart. You'll answer my texts?" "Always." She smiled. Then she followed her father toward the terminal. Halfway there, Ryan stopped. He turned around. For a second, I thought he might apologize. Instead, he said, "We'll talk when I get back." I smiled politely. "Sure." Then I watched them disappear into the crowd, and for the first time in years I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not because my marriage was falling apart. Not because I wanted revenge. But because I had finally stopped sacrificing myself to keep everyone else comfortable. What Ryan didn't know was that while he was boarding that ship, I was preparing for my first meeting with the executive team in Denver. And what started as a canceled anniversary was about to become something much bigger. The Monday after Ryan left for the cruise, I flew to Denver. The trip wasn't mandatory. Technically, my official start date was still weeks away. but the executive team wanted me to attend a strategic planning retreat, and I wanted to see firsthand what my future might look like. As my plane descended over the Rocky Mountains, sunlight spilled across the peaks, turning them gold against the morning sky. I stared out the window and felt something I hadn't experienced in a very long time. Possibility. Not excitement. Exactly. Something quieter. The feeling that maybe my life wasn't finished becoming what it could be. For years, I had organized my future around Ryan. Every professional opportunity, every personal decision, every long-term plan. Now, for the first time, I was organizing my future around myself. The realization felt strange and liberating. The retreat took place at a conference center outside Boulder. Most of the executives were in their 40s and 50s. They were experienced, direct, and refreshingly practical. Nobody treated me like someone's wife. Nobody viewed me as support staff. Nobody assumed my role was to help someone else succeed. They wanted my expertise, my judgment, my leadership. On the second afternoon, I found myself sitting across from the company's CEO, Michael Reynolds. We were reviewing supply chain projections when he paused. "You almost turned this down." I smiled. "I did. What changed?" The question wasn't invasive, just curious. I considered lying. Instead, I told the truth. I realized I'd been putting my own life on hold. Michael nodded, as if he understood immediately. "You'd be surprised how many people do that." That conversation stayed with me long after the meeting ended. Because it wasn't really about careers. It was about value. About recognizing your own. Back in Ohio, Ryan's cruise was apparently going well. At least according to social media. Ava posted pictures on sunsets, swimming pools, family dinners, excursions. One photo showed Ava standing between Ryan and Sarah, smiling brightly. Looking at it didn't make me angry. If anything, it made me sad. Because Ava genuinely seemed happy, and none of this was her fault. She wasn't the problem. She had never been the problem. The real problem was that Ryan had spent years convincing himself that being a good father excused being a poor husband. Those weren't the same thing, and eventually, one role could not compensate for failing the other. On Wednesday evening, my phone rang. "Ryan," I answered. "Hey." His voice sounded exhausted. "Hey." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said I had a rough day. I sat back in my hotel chair. "What happened?" He laughed bitterly. "Everything." Apparently, one of his project managers had accidentally approved incorrect material specifications. A vendor shipment was delayed. A permit issue surfaced on another project. And somehow, every problem seemed connected to systems Ryan barely understood. Normally, I would have spent hours helping. This time I listened quietly. "You know what the worst part is?" he finally asked. "What?" "I keep realizing how much stuff you handled." I stared out the hotel window. Denver's skyline glowed against the evening sky. Part of me wanted to say, "Finally." Instead I said, "It was a team effort." "No." His voice softened. "It really wasn't." That surprised me, because it sounded honest, for the first time in years. After we hung up, I sat alone for a long while. Not celebrating, not gloating, just thinking. Revenge, I was discovering, didn't feel the way movies suggested. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't about making someone suffer. The most satisfying part wasn't watching Ryan struggle. It was realizing I no longer needed his approval. That distinction mattered. Back on the cruise, things weren't going quite as smoothly as Ryan expected. I learned that later, much later. At the time, all I knew was that Ava started texting me more frequently. The messages began casually, photos, vacation updates, funny observations, then gradually they became more personal. One night she sent, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you mad at Dad?" I stared at the screen. Teenagers often understood more than adults realized, especially smart ones. "I was hurt," I replied. A few minutes passed. Then, "He hurt you a lot, didn't he?" The message hit harder than I expected, not because it was cruel, because it was accurate, and because it came from a 16-year-old girl. I chose my words carefully. "Your dad loves a lot of people." "That's not what I asked." I sighed. No wonder, she Ryan's daughter, persistent, direct. Eventually, I typed, "Sometimes people can love you and still take you for granted." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Finally, "I think he does that." I didn't answer immediately. Ava sent another message. "I don't think he even notices." That one hurt. Because she was right. The next morning, she texted again. This time with a story. Apparently, Sarah had thanked Ryan for helping organize several details of the trip, as Ryan had spent hours coordinating activities, transportation, and logistics. Ava's message ended with, "He can remember all that stuff." Then another text arrived. "But he forgot your anniversary." I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I was angry, because the observation came from his daughter, the one person he believed justified everything. Children eventually grow up, and when they do, they often see the truth more clearly than adults. Meanwhile, Carter Construction continued stumbling through a difficult month. Nothing catastrophic, no disasters, no collapse, just a steady stream of problems that required competence instead of improvisation. One Friday afternoon, Ryan called again. His voice sounded different, less defensive. "I owe you an apology." The words were unexpected, so unexpected that I almost thought I'd misheard them. "For what?" I asked quietly. A hollow laugh escaped him. "Where should I start?" Neither of us spoke. Then he continued, "I thought this was about the cruise." I waited. "I think it's about years." There it was. The truth. Small, simple, painfully overdue. Years. Not one cruise, not one anniversary. Years of assumptions. Years of imbalance. Years of expecting understanding without offering the same in return. For a moment I felt tears threatening. Not because I wanted him back. Not because everything was fixed. Because hearing the truth after so many years carried its own emotional weight. "I didn't realize how much I was asking from you," he said. I closed my eyes. "You never asked." "What do you mean?" "You expected." Silence. Heavy silence. The kind that arrives when someone finally recognizes themselves in a mirror they spent years avoiding. And somewhere in that silence I sensed something changing. Not enough to save our marriage. Not yet. But enough to force Ryan to confront a reality he could no longer explain away. By the time Ryan returned from the cruise, summer had settled over Ohio. The air felt heavier, the days stretched longer, and the maple trees surrounding our property stood motionless under the July heat. I was home when he arrived. Not because I had been waiting for him. Because it was Saturday. I was sitting on the back patio with a glass of iced tea and a stack of relocation paperwork when his truck pulled into the driveway. For a moment I simply watched. 8 years. That was what I saw. Not a villain, not an enemy. 8 complicated years. Ryan stepped out of the truck looking tired. Much more tired than when he had left. He grabbed a suitcase from the bed of the truck and walked toward the house. Then he noticed me. Our eyes met. For a second, neither of us moved. Finally, he approached. Hey, his gaze dropped to the paperwork on the table. "Denver?" "Denver," he nodded slowly. The reality was becoming harder to ignore. This wasn't a threat, it wasn't leverage. It wasn't punishment, it was happening. Ryan pulled out a chair and sat down. The silence felt strangely peaceful. A month earlier, it would have felt uncomfortable. Now it simply felt honest. "How was the cruise?" I asked. A faint smile appeared. "Ava had fun." I noticed he didn't answer the actual question. That told me enough. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Ryan surprised me. It wasn't what I expected. I looked at him. What wasn't? The cruise. I waited. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. Honestly, it felt weird. Weird? Yeah. His eyes drifted toward the backyard. Ava loved it. Sarah and I got along fine. Another pause. But the whole time I kept thinking about home. I said nothing. Not because I didn't care. Because I wanted him to continue. I thought I'd feel good about my decision. Instead, he sounded disappointed. I didn't. That admission carried more weight than any apology. Because nobody had forced him to reach that conclusion. Experience had. Over the next several days, life continued moving forward. Denver preparations intensified. My new employer sent housing options. Relocation specialists called. Executive onboarding meetings filled my calendar. Every step made the move more real. Meanwhile, Carter Construction continued, struggling, not failing. Struggling. There was a difference. Ryan was competent, hardworking, determined. But he had spent years depending on systems he barely understood. Now he was trying to master everything simultaneously. One Tuesday evening, I came home to find him sitting alone at the kitchen table. A laptop sat open. Financial reports covered the surface. He looked exhausted. "Long day?" I asked. Ryan laughed softly. "You really like asking that question." "Maybe. He leaned back, then he surprised me again. I used to think you had the easier job. I nearly choked on my water. The easier job? His expression became sheepish. I know. I laughed despite myself. That earned the first genuine smile I had seen from him in weeks. For a brief moment, the tension eased. Then reality returned. A week later, Ava asked if she could visit. Just her, no Ryan, no Sarah, just Ava. We met at a small cafe near downtown Columbus. She arrived wearing jeans, sneakers, and the permanently serious expression that appeared whenever she was thinking too much. Teenagers believed adults couldn't recognize that look. They were usually wrong. After ordering iced coffees, we found a booth near the window. For several minutes, we talked about school, friends, college plans, normal things. Then Ava finally asked the question she had clearly rehearsed. Are you leaving because of my dad? I looked at her carefully. Partly. She nodded as if she already knew. I thought so. I reached across the table and touched her hand. This isn't your fault. I know. The answer came immediately. Too immediately, which meant she had been thinking about it for a long time. Ava stared down at her coffee. Then she said something I will never forget. You always had to give things up. I blinked. What? For us? The words came quietly. But mostly for Dad. My chest tightened. Children noticed more than adults realized. They noticed sacrifices, patterns, silences. They noticed who adjusted and who never did. Ava swallowed. You know what made me mad? What? He kept saying the cruise was for me. I frowned. Wasn't it? She shook her head. Not really. That answer surprised me. Ava continued. I wanted a vacation. She shrugged. I didn't ask him to skip your anniversary. The simplicity of that statement hit with astonishing force. For years, Ryan had justified decisions using Ava's needs. Now Ava herself was rejecting that justification because she understood something he didn't. Love should not require sacrificing the same person over and over again. A few days later, Ava had a conversation with her father. I wasn't there, but Ryan later told me about it. Apparently, she walked into his office after dinner, closed the door, and sat down. Then she asked, Dad, why is it always Emily? Ryan didn't understand. What do you mean? Why is she always the one who has to give things up? According to Ryan, he couldn't answer. Not because he didn't want to, because he genuinely didn't know. For years, he had viewed Emily the wife as permanent, reliable, understanding, stable, like gravity, like electricity, like something that would always exist. The possibility of losing it had never felt real until now. That conversation with Ava changed him more than any argument ever could, because it removed his favorite defense. He couldn't blame Sarah, couldn't blame circumstances, couldn't blame co-parenting. His own daughter was holding up a mirror, and she wasn't looking away. That Friday evening, Ryan knocked on my office door at home. I looked up from my laptop. Got a minute? I nodded. He entered and sat across from me. For a moment, he seemed nervous. Then he took a deep breath. I need to ask you something. Okay, are we getting divorced? The room became very quiet. I had known the question was coming. Still, hearing it aloud felt different, more final, more real. I studied the man across from me, the man I had loved, the man who had hurt me, the man who was finally beginning to understand what he had done. And for the first time, I answered honestly. I don't know. Ryan looked down, not relieved, not devastated, just honest. For now, that honesty would have to be enough. 3 weeks later, I moved to Denver. The actual move happened on a bright August morning, the kind of day that felt almost too beautiful for goodbyes. A moving truck sat in the driveway. Boxes filled the garage. The house echoed in a way it never had before. I stood in the kitchen one last time, looking around at the room where so much of my life had happened. Holiday dinners, birthday cakes, arguments, quiet mornings with coffee. Ordinary moments that seemed insignificant until they became memories. Ryan stood near the counter, hands in his pockets. Neither of us had slept much the night before. There was too much left unsaid, and yet somehow we had already said the important things. A few months earlier, I would have expected a dramatic farewell. Tears, promises, grand gestures. Instead, reality gave us something more meaningful. Honesty, the kind that usually arrives after people have run out of excuses. You really got the corner office? Ryan asked. I laughed softly, apparently. Nice view? Very nice. He nodded, then he smiled. A real smile. Not forced, not defensive. I always knew you'd be good at that job. The compliment should have felt satisfying. Instead, it felt bittersweet. Because part of me wished he had said things like that years ago. Still, better late than never. Outside, movers loaded the last of my furniture. Inside, neither of us seemed eager to end the conversation. Finally, Ryan looked at me. I owe you something. I tilted my head. What? A thank you, I almost smiled. You don't owe me that. Yes, I do. His voice was firm. For years, Ryan had been quick to defend himself, quick to explain, quick to justify. Now he simply spoke the truth. You helped build my company. I said nothing. You helped raise Ava. Still nothing. You carried responsibilities I barely noticed. His eyes drifted toward the floor. And I treated that like it was normal. The room became quiet, not uncomfortable, reflective. Sometimes accountability looked less dramatic than revenge stories promised. Sometimes it looked like a man finally admitting who he had been. I was angry for a while. Ryan continued. About Denver, I nodded. I know. But I get it now. That sentence mattered, not because it erased the past, because it acknowledged it. Understanding after the fact couldn't undo years of imbalance, but it could prevent the same mistakes from happening again. A car horn sounded outside. The moving crew was ready. I picked up my purse. Ryan looked at me. Then, after a long pause, he asked, "Do you think there's still a chance for us someday?" The question hung between us. Months earlier, I might have answered from anger, or heartbreak, or hope. Now I answered from clarity. I think there's a chance for better versions of us. He smiled sadly. That's not exactly an answer. No, it isn't. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I walked forward and hugged him. Not because everything was fixed. Not because I had forgotten. Because despite everything, 8 years of marriage deserved kindness at the end. When I stepped back, his eyes were wet. Mine probably were too. Then I left. The first 6 months in Denver changed my life. The work was challenging, demanding, exciting. For the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking my ambitions to fit someone else's expectations. I wasn't apologizing for success. I wasn't negotiating away opportunities. I was simply living and thriving. The executive position turned out to be everything I hoped it would be. My team respected me. The company trusted me. The future felt open again. Meanwhile, Ryan faced his own transformation. We stayed in touch occasionally. Mostly practical conversations at first, then longer ones, more honest ones. According to Ava, her father had changed. Not overnight, not magically, but genuinely. He stopped volunteering Emily's sacrifices for her, stopped assuming people would always accommodate him, stopped treating reliability as an infinite resource. Most importantly, he started listening. Actually listening. One evening, about 9 months after my move, Ava called me. She was laughing before I even answered. "What happened?" I asked. "You won't believe, Dad. That was usually an interesting beginning. What did he do?" "He forgot his own plans." I smiled. "Okay." Sarah asked him for help moving furniture. I immediately recognized the irony. Years earlier, he would have canceled anything, without hesitation. And he said no. I laughed. Seriously? Seriously. Apparently, Ryan had prior commitments. Apparently, he suggested hiring movers. Apparently, he respected his own schedule. The old Ryan would never have done that. Not because helping was wrong, because balance had never existed. Now it did. Ava's voice softened. I think he finally gets it. After the call ended, I sat quietly in my apartment overlooking downtown Denver. City lights stretched across the evening skyline. Cars moved below. Life continued. And I thought about revenge. Not the movie version. Not the fantasy version, the real version. The satisfying part wasn't watching Ryan suffer. He had suffered, certainly. Losing certainty always hurts. Losing complacency hurts too. But suffering wasn't the victory. Growth was. The real revenge was forcing someone to experience the consequences of taking you for granted. The real revenge was removing your labor, your energy, your sacrifices, and letting reality reveal your value. For years, Ryan believed I would always adapt, always understand, always stay. When I stopped doing those things, he finally saw what I had been carrying. And once he saw it, he couldn't unsee it. A year after I moved, I returned to Ohio for Ava's high school graduation. The ceremony took place on a warm May evening. Families filled the stadium. Students crossed the stage. Proud parents cried. Normal American life unfolding exactly as it should. Afterward, everyone gathered for photos. Ava stood between Ryan and me wearing her graduation gown and a smile bright enough to light the entire field. Sarah joined us too, the four adults who had shaped her life. Not perfect, not always successful but trying. As the cameras clicked, Ava suddenly laughed. "What?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nothing. That's not true." Her grin widened. "I was just thinking." "Thinking what?" She looked at all of us. Then she said, "It's amazing how much easier life gets when people stop taking each other for granted." Nobody answered immediately, because there was nothing to add. She was right. The lesson was simple. The kind people often learn too late. Love isn't proven by how much someone can endure. Respect isn't measured by how much someone will sacrifice. And the people who quietly hold your life together are not obligations. They are gifts. Treat them accordingly. As for Ryan and me, our future remained unwritten. Maybe friendship, maybe something more one day. Maybe not. But whatever happened next would be built on truth instead of assumptions. And that, I had learned, was worth more than any anniversary trip ever could have been. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to think about the people who quietly support your life every day. Sometimes, snorts, the strongest relationships aren't lost because of one big mistake. They fade through years of small things left unnoticed. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy meaningful stories about resilience, justice, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next story.